Oh, hello. Welcome to the Curious Emporium. Have a look at what we have in store for you.
When you picture the Venetian lagoon, you think of breathtaking beauty, right? Gondolas, stunning architecture, but hiding in plain sight is a small, overgrown island. This island is called Poveglia, and it has a reputation that's, well, absolutely terrifying. Today we're going to dig into why people call it one of the most haunted places on the entire planet.
Just let that sink in for a second. That's a local saying in Venice. It tells you everything you need to know about how people feel about this place. It's not just haunted. In local legend, it's literally a kind of hell on earth, the final stop for the wicked. And that sets a pretty chilling stage for the history we're about to uncover.
To really wrap your head around Poveglia's story, you have to start with this number, 160,000. That's the estimated number of people who died here. Now, keep in mind, the island is only 17 acres. That's an almost unimaginable amount of death and suffering packed into such a tiny space.
It gets even grislier. For centuries, this island was used as a massive, open-air pit for burning bodies. The claim is that the very soil itself is thick with human remains, up to 50% ash. Even today, local fishermen refuse to cast their nets anywhere near it, terrified they'll pull up human bones.
Okay, so where did this legacy of horror actually come from? To understand why the island is considered so haunted, we have to peel back the first, and maybe the most gruesome, layer of its history, its time as a quarantine station, or a lazaretto, during the centuries of plague that tore through Europe.
So this timeline really shows you how Poveglia's dark fate was sealed. Look, Venice was a massive trading hub, which made it incredibly vulnerable to disease. So back in 1348, they came up with the idea of quarantine. By the 16th century, Poveglia became one of their main quarantine islands. And then by 1777, it was the mandatory stop for every single ship. If you had any symptoms at all, you were forced off your boat and onto the island. And most people never left.
And here's something wild. This island's brutal history is literally baked into our language today. The word quarantine, it comes directly from this practice. Quaranta is Italian for 40 days. That's how long you were held in isolation to see if you would live or die. For thousands and thousands of people on Poveglia, it was just a 40-day death sentence.
It's hard to imagine what it was really like, but this quote from a 16th century writer, Rocco Benedetti, paints a horrifying picture. He described it as hell on earth. People were crammed together, and the line between sick and dead just vanished. Workers would just throw bodies into mass graves, sometimes without even checking if they were actually dead yet. It wasn't a hospital, it was a place you went to die.
You'd think that after centuries of being a plague island, the story couldn't possibly get any darker. But you'd be wrong. After the plague era ended, Poveglia was abandoned for a while. But in the 20th century, a whole new chapter of suffering was about to begin.
So, in 1922, they decided to reopen the island. And what for? A psychiatric hospital. That same isolation that made it perfect for quarantine was now used to hide away the mentally ill, far away from Venetian society. And it's from this period that the island's most famous and terrifying ghost stories really take shape.
And this is where fact and folklore get completely tangled up. The legend, which you've probably heard on some paranormal TV show, is just chilling. It tells of a sadistic doctor who performed crude lobotomies on patients with hammers and chisels up in the bell tower. The story goes that he was eventually driven mad by the island's ghosts and either jumped or was pushed from that same tower. The historical record, though? It's much simpler. A hospital existed, yes, but there's absolutely no evidence of some mad doctor or his awful experiments.
So, whether the stories are true or not, they have absolutely cemented the island's haunted reputation. People who've managed to get onto the island illegally report all kinds of terrifying stuff. Voices telling them to get out, screams coming from the old hospital, seeing shadowy figures. But maybe the creepiest claim of all, hearing the old bell tower toll, even though the bell was taken down years and years ago. So after the asylum finally shut its doors in 1968, the island was just left to rot, a decaying monument to all that suffering. But believe it or not, that's not where the story ends. In a pretty incredible twist, the narrative of Poveglia is starting to shift from one of horror to one of hope.
And that really makes you wonder, right? What do you do with a place like this? A place so deeply scarred by its past. Can it ever be anything more than the island of ghosts? For a very long time, it seemed like the answer to that question was a definite no.
For a while, it seemed like its fate was sealed.
Back in 2014, the Italian government tried to cash in and put a 99-year lease up for auction. An Italian businessman actually won, but for various reasons, the whole deal just fell apart. And that failure accidentally sparked something brand new.
See, in response to the island almost being sold off, a group of local Venetian residents got together and formed an association. They called it Poveglia per tutti, which means Poveglia for everyone. And their goal was simple, but also incredibly bold: take the island back for the people of Venice.
And get this wasn't just some small petition. This was a real grassroots movement. We're talking over 4,500 people chipping in, raising almost €500,000. They weren't just protesting, they were raising money to compete for the island themselves.
And after years of fighting, years of legal battles, they won. It's a huge deal. On August 1st, 2025, Poveglia per tutti officially secured the lease from the state. For the first time in centuries, the Island of Ghosts was finally in the hands of the local community.
So what's the new plan? Well, it's pretty amazing. They want to completely transform the island's purpose. Instead of a place of torment, they want to make it a sanctuary for the living. The idea is to create a public park just for Venetian residents, a quiet place to escape the millions of tourists. They plan to repurpose the old buildings for cultural projects, all while making sure to respect the island's heavy history.
So, in the end, the story of Poveglia isn't just about ghosts or plague pits anymore. It's become this incredible story about community, about resilience, and about reclaiming a place from its dark past. The people of Venice are trying to prove that even the most haunted places can be brought back into the light. The big question is, can they really succeed? Can you turn an island of the dead into a refuge for the living? Only time will tell.